Yes.
Nice.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, welcome to our RDA meeting today. As chair of the redevelopment agency of the Murray City, I have determined that due to the continued rise of COVID-19 case counts, holding an in-person meeting with an anchor location presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those in attendance. Under the circumstances, House Bill 5002, an amendment to the Open and Public Meetings Act allows electronic meetings to be held without, electronic meetings to be held without an anchor location so long as the public has had an opportunity to view the meeting and submit public comments. We are holding today's RDA meeting via video conference, and the meeting is being live streamed at www.murraycitylive.com. That's www.murraycitylive.com. If you have public comments to submit to the RDA, please do so by email, and that would be to rda@murray.utah.gov. Again, that's for public comments for this meeting to be sent via email let's start over again. rda@murray.utah.gov. And we'll announce that again later. All right, we've got through that part. Thank you. Welcome everyone that's joining us. Welcome to board members, mayor, council, Melinda, everyone. Thank you for being here. Our first part of the agenda will be the approval of our previous meeting that was held June 16th, 2020. Are there any questions or issues on that? If there are, bring them forth. If not, we'll ask for a motion.
Brett, I'll move approval of the June 16th, 2020 meeting minutes.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Rosalba. Jennifer.
Ms. Martinez.
Aye.
Mr. Cox.
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez.
Aye.
Ms. Turner.
Aye.
Mr. House.
Aye. Thanks, Jennifer. Second, we'll go into those citizen comments that we just mentioned about. Again, rda@murray.utah.gov. Melinda, do you have any yet?
I have not received any, but let me check again.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not seeing any. Jay, did you see any come through on your end?
Nope, no comments.
Okay.
No comments. Okay, Mayor, no comments on there from you? Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item number 3, a discussion and consideration of a resolution of the redevelopment agency of Murray City approving and authorizing a participation agreement with TMB Limited Company, DBA BCW Capital for tax increment reimbursement for the development and operation of a professional office development and entrepreneurial center in the ore sampling mill community reinvestment area for the property located at 5510 South, 300 West. Melinda Greenwood presenting. Thank you, Melinda.
Thank you. All right, let me get this. So I wanted to just say thank you to the board for your patience with this. I realize we've had some last minute information to you all as we've hurried to work with the developer and get this agreement put together, and the back and forth that goes between the RDA and the ore sampling mill. So, and thanks also to the ore sampling mill folks for their quick turnaround and their patience with us as we've worked with GL to get this agreement drafted. I wanted to just go over some of the highlights of the contract, and then obviously any questions you have. We have the applicant here today for addressing any questions you may have, and then we can have a discussion and see what you have to say about the agreement. But this has been a project that really has been, I think, even almost now 4 years in the making. So to have it to this point, being here really near the finish line it's a great place to be. And one of the changes that we want to make you aware of is and Brett or Chair Hales just read the agenda language, but the applicant would like to actually change the LLC that the agreement will be with, and he wants to create a new agency or a new entity that would be called the Jesse Knight Legacy Center. So we have known that since we started talking with them last year, one of the ways they felt like they could make this project feasible was to subdivide the property and leave the north part out of the project, and that reduces remediation costs. So I want to make the board aware that the conditional use permit that was approved in 2017 will be a version of what will end up being approved. And what they intend to do at this point in time, again, is to finish cleaning up the site. They will be constructing a building that will be office space, and they think that'll be anywhere between 40 and 50,000 square feet. That is a little bit smaller than what was intended back in 2017, but it has to be smaller square footage because without the additional north end of the parcel, they can't park that much square footage. So just wanted to make the board aware that there will be some changes coming forward. Those will go through the Planning Commission and they wouldn't come to the RDA board. That's just the normal process that the conditional use permit would come through. And we've stated that in the agreement. When that conditional use permit gets amended or when it gets approved, that'll automatically become an amendment to this agreement if it is approved by the board. I think the most important thing for the board to know is that there is a cap on the reimbursement for $2.5 million. So the reimbursement, the ore sampling mill group would like that to be retroactive to the funding that they've already spent. And again, considering that this really has been a project that's been 3 or 4 years in the making, they went forward in good faith and did a lot of cleanup on the site, removing a bunch of debris and garbage and old vehicles, and even tore down a portion of the building that couldn't be salvaged. And so they would like for the $2.5 million to include the approximate $1 million that they've already spent. Some of that is also expenses that have gone towards environmental assessments. And they, at this point, believe that they'll spend another $1.5 million in remediation costs. So those two together, again, would total $2.5 million. They are asking for administrative costs of 8%. The contract that we sent to you on Friday had that at 4%. In our conversations with them again yesterday morning, they came back and said that in their due diligence over the weekend and trying to get everything put in place to move forward with this project as quickly as they can, they have found that the insurance costs on a project that has radioactive material has been much higher than other projects, which makes sense. So they were asking for that to be increased from 4% to 8%. The 4% that we had it at would be a total of $100,000 out of the $2.5 million. So 8% would be a total of $200,000 that they would be wanting to code to administrative costs. I did, and our Public Works Director, Danny Astle, is also in the meeting too, but I did just phone to him to confirm what I had stated earlier, which is markup, contractors' markup or administrative costs on projects is typically between 5% and 8%. And so, that is not at all uncommon to have it be at 8%, especially considering the radiation. So I have talked with a couple of the board members earlier today, and that was a point that they had brought up and wanted an explanation and may want to discuss further. And then I think it's also important for the board to know that any of the reimbursement would need to come to the city with reasonable documentation. So If there's a dispute between us and the ore sampling mill on what reasonable is or what the documentation contains, or if it's a valid expense, we have kind of a mediation process set up in the agreement as well. And I think really the other changes that came through from this morning were very minimal. And so, really nothing of substance, but that is the real short version, fast and short version of, again, a project that's been 3 or 4 years in the making. So I will stop sharing my screen, and then board members, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And again, we do have Mr. Bart Warner, Mr. Ken Merrill, and Mr. David Baird here from the ore sampling mill party to answer any questions.
Thank you, Melinda. Okay, we'll turn it over to the board for questions regarding this. Go ahead, Diane.
Yes, I'll start. My concern is the 8% doubling the administrative fees, which you and I talked about earlier, Melinda. I just think that's too much. I mean, yeah, I'm not comfortable with that. Moving it up a little bit from the 4%, I'm okay with 5 or 6, but 8 is, I think that's just too much. So I wish I felt better about this whole thing, but at this point, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable, especially with, just finding out about all this stuff this morning. So anyway, that's my comments.
Okay, any other comments or statements? Thank you, Diane.
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable. It seems like we've been in regressive bargaining. Last month, we agreed, unless I'm mistaken, to do $2.5 million additional dollars to help with cleanup. And now it seems like we're going to take $1 million of that $2.5 million, repay the developer for site prep, and leave $1.5 million to continue on with site prep and, I guess, environmental work. Will that be enough? And why did we do that? Because that wasn't, I don't believe, unless I missed something, that wasn't the direction we were talking about last month.
Go ahead, Melinda.
Yeah, I'll take that. Board Member Cox, thank you for the question. So I think this is actually probably my failure to adequately communicate to the board. It's always been my understanding that the total expenses, including what they had already spent, would be the $2.5 million. So I may not have clearly communicated that to the board. But they always, my conversations with them has been that they've spent about $1 million. They feel like they'll spend another $1.5 million to clean up the site. So I think, let's see, Bart's not on with the picture, but I think David and Ken, is that a head nod of what your understanding has always been with the conversation?
That's what I always understood. And so when it wasn't written that way on the document, I think we just tried to clarify that.
Yeah, so my apologies. That I obviously clearly didn't explain that to the board.
Melinda, let me ask you a question real quick. So what Dale just said about the $1.5 million, the million and the $1.5 million, I was concerned also. But when you said something earlier, my concern was to pay that up front. Is that what that $1 million would do, is pay up front, or does that wait? What's the difference between, is there much of a difference, or is there a huge difference from splitting it up the way we're doing, even though it's $2.5 million? Help me out there.
So in my opinion, I don't think there is a difference. The difference is, I mean, it's all $2.5 million in the end. We would not pay any of the reimbursement until the TIF till the increment is actually generated, which means they've constructed the building, they have a certificate of occupancy, and they are generating the property tax. I think really, the difference is they're asking, for reimbursement of the funding that they've already spent. And I think that the length of time that it's taken to get, this development agreement put together, some of the turnover with, Tim leaving and some of those things really have led to a delay. But they kind of, I think after they got their conditional use permit, they just kind of forged ahead and started cleaning up the site in good faith that a development agreement was forthcoming. So it's always been my understanding that the $2.5 million was an additional 1.5 above what they've already spent.
So Dale, go ahead. Sorry.
So this is Bart Warner. Can I respond to a few things here?
Could I just say one more thing? I appreciate it's been your understanding, but is there anybody else on this board that understood that we were giving back $1 million and going forward with $1.5 million?
No, and that's what, I didn't understand that. And that's why the question I had for Melinda was just, when you help me out before Bart, I want to ask Melinda before Bart talks. Melinda, help me and maybe Dale, I don't know if anybody else, but help us understand what that 2.5 difference from what we were thinking in our heads, that the $2.5 million was going to be totally with TIF. It still is TIF, but what benefits Bart Warner or his group by paying $1 million from their cost and $1.5 million later? I don't understand. Is there a benefit to do it that way? Because what my biggest concern is I don't want Murray City to have to pay upfront more money that we had agreed that we weren't going to pay anything up front. Is that still correct, that we're not paying anything up front? And what's the difference and why are we doing it differently?
No, it's the developer that's footed the bill. So they're the ones that have spent the $1 million. I suppose it depends on what your definition of upfront is, but we wouldn't contribute any money back to them again until after a project is on the books, collecting property tax, certificate of occupancy. Even if they went forward and cleaned the site and never constructed a building, they wouldn't get any reimbursement because it's that building getting on the property tax rolls that triggers their reimbursement. So, to address some of the expenses that they have had so far has been working with environmental firms to get some assessment of the property and some soils samples. And I suppose that, this is just my opinion. It appears the board has perhaps a different opinion, but, the site was terribly dilapidated. There was all sorts of garbage and debris on the site. There's cost to removing that, cleaning it up. I think that's a reasonable cost for an RDA or for the use of TIF increment to go to, site clearing. I think that is an easily justifiable expense. Traditionally, in Murray, the RDA has contributed most, if not all, of the costs for TIF to either infrastructure or to soils remediation. So site clearing may be a bit of a different approach on that, but I think it's a very valid and a justifiable approach. I also want to point out, and I did have this conversation with the ore sampling group on Friday, that if they were to be reimbursed for any of the past expenses, the application of still having good solid documentation and justifiable documentation for any of those expenses would still be there. And so if there was not adequate documentation on some of the expenses, then that's something that we would not be in favor of reimbursing. I hope that answers your question a little more directly.
Let me understand this. In terms of site clearing for environmental use, right now we don't know, or we know that Ken Merrill has determined this site to be cleaned from his company. But from what we also understood before this, at the end of last week, was that an environmental firm was going to come in and determine how much more was going to be cleaned up, and it could be more than 2.5 million. Let's be real.
Right.
So
Right.
100 million, hold on, 100 million of that is determined at with reasonable documentation that we will cover that. But then is that justifiable for the DEQ at the state?
Rosalba, you mean $1 million? You said 100 million.
Oh, sorry, $1 million. Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure. I just want to make
And
sure.
is that reasonable? I mean, is that going to be justifiable for the DEQ going forward? And looking at what has already been done. I'm just worried that if we say yes, okay, let's give the 2.5 million, and yes, let's do the $1 million, but then later come to discover that there's more site cleanup that has to be made, and looking at an actual environmental company that's going to say it's going to be X amount. So how does that? One, for me, it feels a little fast, and there's so many components that we are obviously missing in this. And how do we reasonably say yes moving forward if we barely got the contract even last night with the changes? So that's where I'm at, and I agree with Councilmember Cox. It's a little unclear.
Mr. Chair, can I chime in?
Please.
So just a comment. What hasn't changed is the fact that we are offering up to a maximum of $2.5 million or 2.5 million in TIF. None of that is going out now. That's all reimbursed, and that hasn't changed. The only thing that's really clarified in this is that previous cleanup that they've already spent becomes eligible towards that 2.5. Now, if it goes to 3 or 3.5, whatever, that doesn't change the cap. And just wanted to make sure that everyone understands that this is not an additional $1 million. It's included in that $1 million, and it's not money that's going to them up front. It's reimbursement for the TIF. So that really hasn't changed overall. It's still our commitment of $2.5 million of TIF.
I have a follow-up question, Mayor. Is there any way that they could say, well, we've had 3 million and you need to pay us that much. TIF needs to be increased. And if TIF isn't increased, we'll take you to court. Or, I mean, is there any way that could happen? I guess that's a concern of mine as well.
So under this contract, the way it's written, the answer would be no, because we are only agreeing to pay up to the 2.5, and only if it generates that. So our limit is the 2.5, and it could be less if it doesn't generate that.
Dale, thank you, Diane. Did that answer yours, Diane?
I still don't feel good about that. I'm afraid there's some way around it, that they're going to get around it. But
Dale, what about, did that answer your question, Dale, on the money up front, or you still have some concerns on that?
I've got concern how it wasn't transparent. I mean, this isn't the developer's fault, and I'm not saying anything about the developer. If I could get my $1 million back, I would too, but I don't believe any of us understood what was presented to us, or we did understand what was presented to us last month, and now, and I understand what the mayor is saying. It still totals $2.5 million, but last month we were at 3.5 for cleanup. $1 million they had spent, and 2.5 up to 2.5 million to finish the cleanup. I understand the numbers. I just don't understand the process, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not thrilled about it at all, having that not made very clear. Or, like I said, we've been regressive bargaining, one or the other. And there again, this isn't the developer's fault. This falls on us.
I wonder if it might not hurt to go back and look at the notes of that last meeting, because I'm pretty sure it was stated that we've already spent about $1 million and there's another $1.5 million to go. which equals the 2.5 million. I'm pretty sure that was talked about.
Well, Melinda, this is Bart. Can I address a few of these issues now?
Yeah, Bart. Yeah, I kind of wanted to go through the council real quick, Bart, if you don't mind for a second.
Sure.
Yeah, let me just go through, because I just want to make sure, unless, do you guys feel you want an answer first before we start asking more questions on maybe what Bart was saying? Go ahead, Bart. Go ahead.
Well, I just think I can clear up a few things that I think we're not making progress on. First of all, I appreciate the fast action Melinda and your city attorneys made to respond to this a lot faster than what she told us might happen normally. Again, this project goes back over 4 years with us. And we felt like we came to an agreement with Tim Tingey and the prior city council. I don't know how many of you were on that original. Were any of you there when we started this 4 years ago? Anyway, I guess
Yes. Yeah, Diane and I were there, but
okay.
I can't speak for Diane, but there was never anything about an agreement.
Well, when we got into this, we felt like we tried to be as upfront as we could with everything, and we've spent a lot more than $1 million when you look at the money we put out for the loan that that owner is not in a position to repay. So, but just sticking to the specifics of this deal, I wish we could show pictures of what the site looked like when I took it over, because they're just, you would not believe it unless you saw it. There was I don't know how many feet can of junk there was there, but not only was it junk and trash and trees and all kinds of burned down building, the house, but it was all contaminated. So Ken had to go through training, HAZWOPER training for all of his men and equipment. And, the cost was just amazing to me as for how much it did cost to get to where we were. The city had worked with Terracon. We engaged them. We've spent money with them. We spent money with other attorneys. There's been a lot of environmental cleanup besides the garbage already. And it was estimated that we would spend $2 million to clean everything up with, back in the late 80s when CERCLA came in and cleaned up everything and all the way to the IMC and Costco site. They thought they had all the radium. So Tim Tingey, made us believe that, he could get a TIF for $2 million. Ken went out, and the only way we could get it down to that price is for him to get bevel exemption on the lead and arsenic. Well, and then the city was going to give us a forever lease agreement on the service access road, which allowed us to put another building on the site. But at the time, we didn't know that the city had a piezometer to continually test the water coming off the palace yards of theirs with contaminated water under the very north tip. So as we got into this farther, Ken found that under the railroad tracks, there was radium. And to make a long story short, we're hoping that he can haul that up to west of Boise for $500,000 to $700,000. I think Ken is your best guess, but we don't know how deep it is. We don't know how much there is. When that happened, the city didn't know they had radium under their service road where the railroad tracks were. And they made a choice, Tim made a choice to not clean that up, which meant we couldn't build a building on it. He couldn't live up to his commitment to give us an indefinite lease on that property. And we hadn't done what we're trying to do now, get a development agreement, which we thought was a formality. But I think it's a very fair question that some of you have asked, where is this what is this $1 million that's already, that we're asking to have reimbursed if we can pull all this off, and not until, and in future value dollars, we pay in present value dollars and it gets paid back in future value dollars. But I think it would be very easy to show documents, the money we've spent, the checks we've written, the pictures of what it was before, the work with the UTA to pay a $10,000 a month bond to only take that wood structure down on Sunday. I mean, it was just, Ken is the most efficient contractor I've ever worked with, and I think he protects, not wasting money in general, let alone my money. So, but that's a fair question, but it's hopefully you'll be fair with me, because that money, if I told Melinda, if we can't have a chance to get that money reimbursed economically, because this could, realistically, the total cost, including the $1 million I've already spent just for the cleanup and remediation, will exceed the 2.5. I understand the risk I'm taking. If it goes higher than that, I have no right to go back and ask for more for the city. And I won't know that until I've spent $2.5 million. And if I still have $1 million to spend, what do I do then? Okay, so I'm the one that's at risk. And it only works, like you said, that if I build a building that's big enough to create enough property tax to even pay that back. So again, that's a fair question, but I think in fairness to me, if there's any question, I hope the council will go back and look at what the property looked like and what has really been done to get it dramatically. But someone coming in today looking at that site would say, what an ugly mess that's tagged and everything else. But if you look at the 3 or 4 feet of garbage, contaminated garbage and things we've already done, that money is real, it's been spent, and it just won't work for me if we can't get reimbursed on that. Up on the north end, when we've asked to subdivide and cut off a little portion of that, again, if you'll remember the configuration, it's like the state of Idaho. We just don't want to deal with the city's piezometer and that contaminated water going under this site. And we don't know that it's going to save us a whole lot of money. We don't need the full 3 acres if we can't have the service road and build the other buildings. So all we're asking is, once Ken determines if the contamination is much more concentrated up in that very north tip, we can't use it for parking. It's too narrow, and we don't want to deal with the city's piezometer. So that's all we're asking there. We still need at least 2.5 acres, hopefully 2 3/4. We're talking about an eighth or a quarter of an acre, no more than a half acre that we would ask to subdivide and not have part of what we ultimately take ownership of. Anyway, hopefully that answers some of your questions. Ken's, the last time in the meeting, in the first meeting with Melinda, she was concerned about protecting the city to make sure that we weren't going to skip any steps or do anything to get it cleaned up. So Ken has engaged another company with employees that used to work for the DEQ. And hopefully, Melinda, you're comfortable that we've contracted, we've started spending money with them. They're going to have oversight on the project. Ken has a lot of risk in doing this, as a contractor. And the other issue, and I appreciate the concern about the 4 to 8%. I have half a dozen other businesses down in our truck center, and I've been in business, almost 40 years, but we have our insurance renewal, garage liability, and all of our insurance due at the end of June. We just luckily got that done. But we had 3 companies. We used to have 6 that bid it. We were down to 2 last year, and both of those said, all of our fees have doubled just because of COVID, but we're not going to bid you this year at all. And we had to go to a captive insurance company, which requires us to put up $250,000 just to start. And I won't bore you with all that, but you talk to anybody that's in business that's had to get their annual liability insurance renewed in the last 3 months, and they'll tell you that it went up probably 300%. So we're talking several $100,000 more to get just liability insurance, let alone the potential. We don't even know what we're going to have to do to get reinsurance. And again, I don't want to waste your time or talk too much about that, but I think, unless you want me to, but I have a rental company, and for the first time in my life in business, judges are giving settlements beyond the original insurance. They're going back to the reinsurance just to give the plaintiffs more money, and it's totally shaken up that the industry of reinsurance. So I don't expect by any token, I mean, forget any interest I've had on the money tied up, $2.5 million for 4 years. And you present value back 20 million, I mean, 2.5 million to this, you know, it's about $1 million at 10%. So even if I could be guaranteed we would not spend over 2.5 million or 3 million, I would love it. But my purpose in doing this whole project is I got a passion, like I said, I got a passion to have something that's memorial to Jesse Knight. It's the most amazing story of a businessman that contributes to a community. And, you know, I would love to finish this, but I realize if I were in any of your shoes, you don't want to make decisions that you don't feel good about. But I sense that part of the problem here is that some of you haven't lived through what those of us who started from the beginning have and understand how difficult this project has been and what's been done to get it to this point. And certainly, I think all of you have some idea that, you know, because you've dealt with other properties that have been contaminated. But this, really, the only reason we came back to go from what I thought was originally 2 million that we spent half of it to 2.5 was because we knew that it was going to take at least $500,000 more to get rid of the radium. And David and certainly Ken, would you agree with that? Or
You know, I finally found the pictures that kind of give you an idea of what this place was like before we started. Would you like to share? Like me to share those with you?
Can we hold 1 second on that real quick? But we may want to get to that. But real quick, time's kind of running. Kat, you're the one that hasn't said anything. Do you want to take a minute?
Thanks. Yeah. For me, my biggest concern is, I mean, it's a lot of money, right? 2.5 million. But if it's all spent on the environmental cleanup piece, I'm not as concerned whether it was already spent on environmental cleanup or will be spent on environmental cleanup. If that's the amount we're going to spend, I'm comfortable with it being previously spent or now, as long as it's very carefully accounted for and that it's a very firm cap of the 2.5. That's for me was my big concern and discomfort previously. And as long as it is a very firm cap, which after reading the agreement it looks to be, I feel very comfortable with it. I agreed with Diane and others that the jump from 4 to 8% is a large jump, and I would feel more comfortable with a 5 or 6% increase in that administrative percentage. And I'd like to know what that percentage means as far as dollars, because I don't have a really good grasp on what that really looks like. Thanks.
Okay, Melinda, can you answer that?
Yeah, so each percent is $25,000. So at 4%, the administrative cost would have been up to $100,000. At 8%, it would be $200,000. 5 is $125,000. 6 is $150,000 or $150,000. I do want to just say, and one of the things that we added into the development agreement, there, I want to help you understand that there's this distinction between what we're going to say is kind of like the environmental cleanup and then like the site clearing and cleanup. Removing debris that's accumulated on site isn't necessarily an environmental cleanup. But I also want to go back and mention something that Mr. Warner said a minute ago. Part of why remediating sites like this is so expensive is because the state requires you to get what's called HAZWOPER training, and it's hazardous something. Don't know the acronym, but it's a very intensive training, like 40 hours of training that's pretty expensive and intensive, that the employees that are going to be handling these materials need to attend and certify that they've attended this training. So so that also attributes to some of the costs. But, you know, I think I just want to differentiate. There's kind of two pots here, because I'm hearing the board members say environmental remediation I think that's a very specific topic. I think that's, that's what the approvals through DEQ on the Bevel exemption and hauling that waste away, that's a separate thing from, taking away like 5 feet of garbage and a bunch of old, rusty cars that have been on site. So the 2.5 million then that they are asking for is a combination of both that. So whether it's, cleaning out trees that were on site and, removing garbage and debris, there's that, and then there's the environmental remediation, which really is what kind of lays before them. The site clearing is what it's kind of the low-hanging fruit that they've already done, and the environmental remediation is what's to come.
There was a lot of environmental cleanup already involved too. So,
Right.
for instance, the basement of this building had 35 feet of water in it. Now, we didn't know what was in that water. So as we pumped that water out, we had to evaporate it and make sure that nothing contaminated any place with that water as it came out. So we built evaporation ponds and pumped all the water out. And then we cleaned up debris that has been thrown into this basement. We're talking about semi-loads, 5, 6, 10 semi-loads, and these are small loads of debris that had been thrown in the basement. We had to clean out the oil that had been the barrels that the kids had dumped into this water. We had to make sure that this water did not contaminate anything. We found 40 or 50 barrels of unknown chemicals on the site. We found it was steady, constant cleanup through the process. So a lot of it was environmental cleanup that we already did, but not the stuff that requires DEQ approval.
Well, the problem is everything was contaminated as far as the DEQ. So you had to treat everything, whether it was a tree or a barrel of chemicals, as if it were contaminated.
Right.
Okay.
Can I also please make another thing that I think will actually give the agency a little bit of additional comfort as well. Just also to kind of reaffirm as the TIF consultant here, yeah, I believe that the agreement for the last 4 years we've tried to strike has always been post-performance, long-term rebate of tax increment, not immediate reimbursement of $1 million. And so I believe that we've been consistent in that. But once again, an appropriate use of tax increment financing is to remove the development impediments that encumber a site. And I would encourage you to go back and look at attachment B of the Zion Public Finance Community Reinvestment Area Study, where it actually identifies all of the different characteristics of blight. And it does it on individual parcels within this ore sampling CRA domain. And if you look at that, it's page 21 of the study. This site actually has 7 out of 7 blight characteristics identified. You can't add any more blight characteristics because it's got every single one of them. So in my opinion, I think this is the perfect example of TIF to be used here. Exactly. That bright red, 7 out of 7. And so it is dramatically more than the other domains that are within this area. Some of those we have moved forward to try to address, as Bart and Ken have just addressed. But the plan has been, we wanted to kind of spruce it up in the short run as a show of goodwill with Murray City to make it look better, and maybe you wouldn't have as many phone calls from people saying, what is that thing right on the front porch of your city as we get off on 53rd. But I just wanted to provide the board members some additional comfort that 7 out of 7 blight characteristics based on state law are on this site. And the things that we're looking for reimbursement for directly address those 7 items. Hopefully that will provide you some additional comfort.
All right. Thank you. I want to go to Rosalba. Rosalba, you had another question.
One of the questions I have is, how was the amount determined? How is 2.5 determined as the final amount for an environmental cleanup of this size?
Melinda?
So I'll probably let Ken Merrill take this, but just real short. So it's the combination of what they know they've already spent, and then Mr. Merrill has done some cost estimates on hauling material away and how much that'll cost to take materials locally through the Bevel exemption and then up to Idaho. So Mr. Warner owns a trucking company, so I think they can probably be pretty accurate on the haul costs for that. They also have worked in the past with Terracon, who does environmental consulting, and I believe that they've received some guidance through that process in the past. But I think Ken Merrill can best answer that question.
So yes, what we did, based on what we'd already done to the property and what we estimate still needs to be taken care of. And we recognize that we don't know exactly how much fill is on there. So I've taken my very best guess on how much radium is on the property based on about 150 test holes around the property. And those test holes being sampled in many different ways. There are dozens of ways to test. One is test for radiation with a meter. One is to send the material off to a site to have true analysis of that material, and then also have the material tested by a local company that can tell us what the contaminants are. So we also what's called an XRF gun, which measures the lead, arsenic, and all the contaminants in the soil. So we've used every method to measure the contaminants in the soil based on a grid, a very large grid, about 50 or 30 feet apart, I can't remember which, but across the property, digging test holes and sampling this material. So we have a relatively good idea of what it's going to cost to take the rest of the material out and clean it up.
All right, thank you. And then let me ask a question, Melinda, Mayor, GL, whoever, on the timing of it. When Diane was concerned about that we get this done and that there's no more money involved besides the 2.5. Is there a time limit on this as far as with the agreement that this has to get going and we have to be at a certain point, or help me out on that?
Yes, the project has to be completed within 5 years.
Okay.
According to this agreement.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor. Okay. And so we're not spending any more, because I'll be honest, when I looked at it yesterday and it came in, and today, I was looking at it and I thought, oh goodness, we have to put $1 million out up front. I realized that's not the case. So there's nothing different from, even though we may have misunderstood what was going on, there's nothing different from last time, the dollar amount. That's besides the 4%, 6%, 8%, whatever we're going to have doing there, administration. But as far as the TIF, it all comes through the TIF. There's nothing up front. That all will be determined with the proof of the amount they've spent and what they will spend.
Yeah, Chair Hells, that is correct. I do want to clarify though that whether it's 4% or 8%, that comes out of the $2.5 million. So you mean, say, I was going to ask you this. So if it were, say, if we said, okay, 8%, that all comes out of that. That's no more out of that $2.5 million. Correct. It's still capped at 2.5 million.
So then tell me this is me, not anybody else. Tell me why would you want to say, well, let's do 4 or 8% instead of 4% if that comes out of the total amount?
So I think realistically, the only way that could really benefit, is that if the off chance that they spend only 2.3 million on this and
they'd get that.
Yeah. Which I think their team and my limited understanding of environmental cleanup, I think that they'll end up spending 2.5 or realistically even more than that. So that would be the only danger in that, is that they could, use some of those as administrative costs versus really hard costs of, like, here was the labor, the trucking, costs, the dump costs at the fee, the dump fees at the landfill. Like those are all costs that would be coded not to administrative. But at the end, it's all 2.5 million, regardless of whatever percentage would be approved for the administrative costs. It's capped at 2.5. They don't get reimbursed until post-performance, meaning project is built, it's on the property taxes or the property tax rolls, and the county is collecting that property tax.
Do they get that $1 million because it's reimbursement? Now, this is just a question that I'm asking. Do they get that $1 million a little earlier for any reason, or not one bit earlier than what they would get the regular TIF?
No, the agreement states that all of the reimbursement will be post-performance. So after that building's complete and in generating property tax.
Over that time, 10, 20, whatever the time frame is. Okay.
Now, sorry, really quick.
Yeah, please.
There's also nothing in the agreement that says they can't come back and ask for more money. Is that correct? Because they can. I mean, that's my understanding, and it's open for interpretation. And but they can come back at any point and say, you know what, guys, we need another $1 million, and not 8, not 6. Let's negotiate and amend this portion of it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's always a possibility. And of course, at that point, I think staff would look at the situation, the circumstance, and work with the attorneys and the executive director, and bring a recommendation to the board. Just because there's a request doesn't mean you need to approve that. I mean, if you'll remember, was it in October when we had Mr. Brodsky had a request, and we did not, but I think any agreement that we have out there always has a possibility for an amendment, whether it's for a development and TIF agreement or any other contract. I think that's generally left as an opportunity that, both parties agree in writing, you can amend an agreement.
GL, is there anything that would help Rosalba on the question she has as far as to throw that in the agreement and say we agree not to ask more than the 2.5 million? Or is that not something you do? What?
I'm having a challenge with the mute button. No, this is like Melinda said, any agreement is subject to amendment if the parties agree, but you have to come to an agreement. And that agreement would be with you as the board.
So you're saying
you could write that, but you can also go back and amend that statement.
Sure, of course you could. But I mean, that might be a little more, especially because Mr. Warner said, no, we're absolutely not going to do that. They may not be object to that to say, no, we'll put that in there.
And the other part too is we may not be the board that amends that.
We might not what?
May be the board.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So
sure.
that was something I just wanted to make sure we were in the understanding of as well.
Okay. All right. So go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say that it's on the agenda for an approval. So if you want to know if they'll put that in there, you need to ask them. Okay.
Well, we'd do that. Okay. So my question to the board is, sorry, we're going to move on, but are we comfortable because I know we were all said, yes, when I asked that question a month ago, yes, everyone's comfortable. Of course, there's been some changes. Are we comfortable with certain changes that we've talked a little bit and putting that, and to move forward? Do we need another week? We could have a special meeting. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but in my opinion, I'm thinking because Mr. Warner and a few others were saying, well, go back and read this and go back and look at that. Of course, we can't do that right now because time's up. Do we want one more week? We don't have to wait 2 weeks. I don't think we do. Maybe timing. I don't think we do. I think we could say we have another meeting a week from today to approve this, or are we comfortable with putting those things in and moving forward this so they can get going?
I believe we should move it in the nature of getting the documents to us last night and kind of still reviewing this today and moving that to a special meeting next week. I feel comfortable with that. I think we should all feel comfortable in our vote. Right now, I don't feel comfortable with that vote if I were to take it today. And I want to make sure that these questions do get addressed in a timely manner, and also give Bart and his team a time to come back and negotiate that as well. And I don't think we could do that all in this one meeting. So
Any other?
I move that we vote next, or have a special meeting next.
Okay, so before we do that, thank you, Rosalba. Mr. Warner, are you okay? And then Jill and Melinda and everyone, Mayor, are we okay to do a meeting a week from today, a special meeting, if that's agreed upon?
This is Bart. I'm okay. Again, we're just running up against the timeline of there's so much regulation and testing and things we have to do to get this thing done this year with contractors the way they are.
Sure.
We were just saying, if like this was drug out for 6 months, it would have been impossible for me to proceed forward.
Sure.
I can certainly give you another week to
okay,
make the decision.
Mayor, okay, is that okay? And if we move that to next week, have a special RDA?
Sure, that's entirely up to you as the chair, Brad, but you can, as long as we meet the noticing requirements, absolutely.
Okay, if it's okay, I'm gonna accept Rosalba's motion to move this to next Tuesday at, let's see, what time can we? Yeah, go ahead.
Brett, can I intercept? I'm going to be gone next week until Friday. Is there any way we could do it on Friday?
That's the 24th of July. Is that?
Oh,
I think that's a holiday.
No,
Dale, could you call in at all, or you're going to be away to where you couldn't?
Yeah, I'm going to be in the hills. I don't know if I'll have reception.
What about Monday?
Brad, that's not the 24th of July. That 24th of July is this week.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, I'm trying to get ahead of myself, aren't I? Thank you. Hey, Dale, I had you convinced, didn't I?
You did.
Okay, then next, so let me just look at my calendar real quick. Sorry. So that would be the next Friday would be the 31st. I can do that. I'd okay, now wait a minute. So that would be this Friday. This 24th, 27th, 28th. You say you're gone the 28th. Okay, so the 31st. Are there any objections from Mr. Warner first to go to the 31st?
I'll make that work.
Okay. All right, let's do that. I have a motion to move that, or go ahead, Rosalba, and motion that date, if you will.
All right, I motion that we have a special RDA meeting to discuss the ore sampling mill project for July 31st. Time to be determined.
Yes. Okay, I need a second on that.
I'll second.
Jennifer?
Ms. Martinez,
Aye.
Mr. Cox,
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez,
Aye.
Ms. Turner,
Aye.
Mr. Helms.
Aye. All right, we'll get that wrapped up and follow through on that. I can see some hesitations. You need a second on the motion. Did I not ask for a second on the motion?
Yeah, I seconded it.
Yeah, I asked for that. And then we got Rosalba, the motion that Dale seconded. Is that correct? Am I doing that correct? Did I do that correct? Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. Time is up. Thanks, Mr. Warner and everyone. Mr. Baird, just so you know that we'll do that by this Friday. And sorry, I think it was the concern of everyone's that they didn't have enough time to go. Not everyone, but some of us, the concern that they didn't have enough time. So we'll do that on Friday, a week from Friday, and then Melinda will real quick have you do that, or Jay.
Okay. Jay, I'll share the screen for you.
Okay.
Is this something we could do on that Friday or no? Okay, you got it. I'm just thinking of time. Sorry.
Well, so the Smelter Site Overlay District is a Superfund site that the city has management and reporting oversight for. It's in Murray City Code Chapter 17.25. And as you can see on the map there, it basically encompasses the IMC complex, Costco, and the UTA Park and Ride, all the way up to the police training center. As we've been talking about with your sampling site, legacy of the of Murray's history as a heavy industry site is that there are high amounts of lead and arsenic here, and as such, it's important that we, for public safety and health, that we keep the site clean, and that there is no access by the public to the contaminants that are in the soil. Basically, there's been a cap placed over it, and we need to make sure that that is being maintained. And so that requires regular inspection and maintenance of those contaminant barriers. And so as a city, we have an annual report that we send to the Utah Department of Environmental Quality and the federal Department of EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. And so we sent that to them in March. And, or no, that was in May. So what we have is the agencies that are the main stakeholders there: Costco, Intermountain Healthcare, Utah Transit Authority, and Murray City. Those three, IHC, Costco, and UTA, send reports of their annual work that they do on the site and their monitoring report to us, and we compile that and send that to the two agencies, the state and federal agencies. And we also report on the work done in the year that may have impacted that. So if there's any sort of construction on site, we report that. And so, next slide, please. So what we have is we've had a number of projects that occurred there last year. Lighting on the IMC walking path, IMC parking lot access gates, the IMC sanitary sewer relocation, Costco freezer upgrade, UTA underground fiber optic install, and then we had our city storm drain monitoring and concrete and asphalt sealing. And so those various projects received reports from the companies that did those reports, and we ensure that those are done satisfactorily, and then we report those results. And that's what's contained in the report that we send to the EPA and DEQ. Hope I did that quick enough. I pared that down from an 1.5-hour presentation. So are there any questions about the SSOD and the permitting process and the report that we provide?
That's impressive for you to cut that from an 1.5 hours to 5 minutes. Thank you. All right. Any questions for Jay on that? Nope. Okay. Nope. Thank you, Jay.
My pleasure.
Melinda, can we do the updates on that Friday, or is that okay? I caught you. Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. So we're good with that. Mayor, anything else?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. And we will, for the RDA meeting, we'll see you on the 31st. And this meeting is adjourned. Turn it over to Rosalba.